you for being here. Thank you for your practice. For those of you who don't know me, my name is John. I'm one of the lay facilitators here at the center, and I'm very honored to be here with you this morning. We'll have a Dhamma talk and some discussion for the next 30 minutes. And my plan is to talk a little bit about the 4 foundations of mindfulness with an emphasis on sharing some practices that have been helpful to me. That is to say, some practical ways of thinking about some ideas and approaches to each of the 4 of the foundations of mindfulness. And we may talk a little bit more about one or the other, but the goal would be to just at least touch on each of the 4 and then have an opportunity to have some conversation for maybe the last 10 minutes or so. And I thought I'd start with a well-known definition of mindfulness from John Kabat-Zinn, who was the founder of the mindfulness-based stress reduction program at the University of Massachusetts in 1979, and along with other men and women like Jack Kornfield and Joseph Goldstein and Sharon Salzberg, who founded IMS in Barre, Massachusetts. John Kabat-Zinn was as responsible as any other single individual for bringing mindfulness to the West, and in particular, in the case of Kabat-Zinn, for ushering in what has become a proliferation of what's sometimes called secular mindfulness, and the avalanche of evidence-based research that has validated its efficacy in clinical settings. He created it to address issues of chronic pain, but also bouts of recurrent depression, loneliness, addiction, and such. And I thought it would be helpful as a way to contextualize and frame the discussion as we toggle back and forth from talking a little bit about what the Buddha said in the Satipatthana Sutta and our busy lives in 2025. So Kabat-Zinn defines mindfulness as paying attention on purpose and without judgment to present moment experience. Again, paying attention on purpose and without judgment to present moment experience. So adding to our attention, intention, the on-purpose piece, bringing our full attention with intention to whatever is happening in our present experience, both external and internal. And equally important to do so without judgment. The great Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck, who lived a long life, she died not long ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and she had a great sense of humor. She said, "Joy is everything that is happening right now, minus your opinion of it." And for me, that encapsulates this idea of coming to our experience without judgment, just allowing what is to be. At the beginning of the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha makes a bold statement to his followers. He says, "Bhikkhus," and with that he includes all of us, "this is the direct path for the purification of beings, for the surmounting of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and grief, for the attainment of the true path, for the realization of Nibbana, namely the 4 establishments of mindfulness." He then introduces the 4 domains of mindfulness, Satipatthana, also known as the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feeling tones, mindfulness of mind, or contemplation of the mind, and mindfulness of dhammas. And dhammas is a little bit of a catch-all. It's not uncommon in Buddhist scripture for the last of a list of virtues to springboard into another entire set of virtues as with the fourth noble truth, which is the truth of the path to the cessation of suffering, which leads us then to the Noble Eightfold Path. Similarly here, Dhammas is understood both literally as the teachings of the Buddha, but it can also be understood as truth or righteousness or the natural laws of the universe, the way things are, what happens, just that, just all phenomenological occurrences in the universe. But for our purposes today, we'll think of it in terms of impermanence, which is one of three characteristics of existence, what are sometimes called the marks of existence: anicca, impermanence, along with dukkha, which is often translated as suffering, but as I'm sure you're all familiar, has a lot of nuance to it. We can talk a little bit about that. And anatta, no self, which I don't expect we'll talk a whole lot about today. And again, I think thinking mainly about mindfulness of Dhammas in the context of impermanence. I will say, though, about dukkha, that my favorite definition that I heard recently comes from one of the gentlemen whom I mentioned earlier, Joseph Goldstein, who thankfully is still with us and teaches at the Insight Meditation Society. And he defined dukkha as the inevitability of unwanted experiences. That makes a lot of sense to me, that all things change. So we start with mindfulness of the body. And we have a unique opportunity in the way that we practice at this center, in the tradition of Luang Por Thien and the rhythmic hand gestures, as we bring attention and awareness to the movement of the body, to do just that. The body is always present. And the nature of our experience in practicing each of the four foundations of mindfulness: mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feeling tones, mindfulness of mind, and mindfulness of Dhammas, is to pay attention to what is happening in the present moment. And again, Mahasati meditation, or what is sometimes called dynamic meditation, this attention to the movement of our body, is really akin to the way we live our lives, in motion. Though some people are more active than others, some people find themselves, by virtue of the work that they do or the lifestyles that they lead, moving more than others. And of course, for some people, movement isn't possible. But movement exists nonetheless within our body, in the many billions of cells that comprise our physiology and allow our organs to function and our blood to flow and the neurocircuitry of our brains to allow us to think and move and act and speak and be. That is a state of movement, and that is something that we can also bring our attention to with regard to mindfulness of the body. I would also mention body scans, which are foundational to the MBSR curriculum, to the program that I referred to earlier, systematically bringing our attention to different regions of our body and noticing the sensations that we experience, again, in the present moment. So it's typical that you might start at the tip of your toes and simply bring consciousness to whatever body sensations or any other experience, internal or external, that which we can access through our five senses, what we can see, what we can hear, what we can taste, what we can touch, what we can smell. and also our internal experience, our thoughts and our emotions and our body sensations. And I would add one other kind of practice, and it's something that we do with the young people that we work with in the Mindfulness for Kids family program here at the center, and in my work with young people. When we talk about mindfulness and we talk about present moment experience, and that is to build a somatic vocabulary, that is words to describe body sensations. It's something that we don't often think about, in my experience anyway. I felt before I actually paid attention to the concept of creating a word bank of body sensations that it was quite limited in my experience. And it's a fun thing to do too with young people, because they come up with words like flurby and gitchery and chiggerish. And we encourage them to do so, to make up words. Having access to that vocabulary, to that nuance of experience, can be very helpful in my experience. And the classic example, of course, are the butterflies in the stomach, which I've been experiencing perhaps for maybe the last 25 minutes or so. And what's interesting about butterflies in your stomach, for example, is that somatic experience, that body sensation, can be reflective, if you will, of all kinds of different thought patterns and emotional valences in our experience. It could be that we're nervous. It could also be that we're excited. And so by bringing attention to it, naming it perhaps, or at least paying attention to it, we may be able to become more accustomed to or aware of what is happening in our experience, and it may allow us to respond more skillfully. So with regard to mindfulness of feeling tones, from a Buddhist perspective, we can think of feeling tones as residing within one of three very broad categories, and understanding that there is a spectrum of experience for everyone. Nonetheless, the Buddha teaches us to think of them in terms of that which is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And again, bringing attention to our feeling tones in the context of one or more of those three categories in the present can help us to become grounded. It can help us to become aware. And if we do so with a non-judgmental approach, we'll notice the transitory nature of those feeling tones, that they come and go, that they don't last. And again, that is, in some respects, the theme of the talk, this idea of impermanence, that everything changes. And that, for me anyway, can be helpful. And in terms of a practice, something I've been thinking about lately is the notion of leaning into the neutral. I think, interestingly for me, ironically perhaps even, it's when we're experiencing pleasant feeling tones, and especially when we're experiencing unpleasant feeling tones, that we are most restless, because we cling to pleasant feeling tones and we don't want them ever to go away. And it causes us to suffer when they do. And they do. And likewise, unpleasant feeling tones we seek to push away immediately. And it makes sense that we would do so, because we're wired to survive, and we know that we would much prefer to feel safe, and we would much prefer to feel good, and whatever that means for different people. But the neutral, to me, presents an opportunity, some space, a kind of openness, moments that we might otherwise regard as being boring, moments that we might slip into an afflicted state of impatience or frustration or even ill will. I feel like that neutral space can very quickly devolve into an unpleasant state unless we bring awareness to it. And perhaps instead of boredom, we shift our mindset to one of curiosity and wonder. Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was a mid-19th century American transcendentalist who was influenced by Buddhism, said the invariable mark of wisdom is to see the miraculous in the common. And it occurs to me that there are moments that we might otherwise categorize as being neutral that invite us into the opportunity for wonder, the opportunity to see the beauty, the exquisite nature of what is happening right now. And it's an opportunity for gratitude, which, like the MBSR program, has been scientifically validated in reams of research and evidence-based science as being good for us. Gratitude is good for you, to give thanks. It benefits not only the person who's being thanked, but it benefits the person who is doing the thanking. And so the pro tip for this one is attributed to Thich Nhat Hanh. And it's super simple. And he invites us simply to bring a smile to our face. And he often refers to it as being a half smile. And he sometimes refers to it as being the idea of a smile. Or he'll say, to smile on the inside of your mouth. It's very hard to have afflictive thoughts, negative thoughts when you're smiling, I find, in my experience. And so that very simple practice for me in practicing mindfulness of feeling tones, bringing a smile to your face, for me, in an instant, can shift your mindset. And particularly in meditation, even to have the idea of a smile can be very helpful. Next, with regard to mindfulness of mind, again, from a Buddhist perspective, the mind is regarded as being a sixth sense, and it is comprised of our thoughts and our emotions and our body sensations. And the interaction of each of those three, the interplay, what does not always feel playful, it can sometimes feel tense and like conflict, perhaps. But another of the big themes, of course, in understanding the Dhamma is interconnectedness or interdependence. And there is an interdependence of thoughts and emotions and body sensations that comprise the mind. And if we can bring our attention to that, there are ways that we can make subtle and sometimes not so subtle adjustments. We had a conversation about this a couple of weeks ago and the relative merits of essentially replacing an afflictive thought with one that's more pleasant. The idea of meeting ill will with loving kindness, or pity with compassion, or jealousy with sympathetic joy, and clinging and aversion with equanimity. These are the Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes. This is the pro tip for working with mindfulness of mind, is to practice each of those. Some people push back against that idea of forcing a smile, arbitrarily just bringing a smile to your face, or counteracting thoughts of ill will towards someone who, in your mind, very well deserves it, with loving kindness. But the Buddha teaches us that we have agency to change our mind. It is an invitation, and it is indeed the way. And it is the only way. It is not going to come from some external presence, some sort of external blessing. It's going to come from within us, that it is indeed up to us to figure out a way to train our minds in a way that leads to the cessation of suffering. And it's a tall order, but it's also a promise that we heard in the opening lines of the Satipatthana Sutta. This is the way. This is the direct path to the cessation of suffering. And so finally, in thinking about mindfulness of Dhammas, understanding that it's a very big picture, that we're talking essentially about everything that happens, the way, both the way things work and also the way to know that. For me, an obvious place to go, a way to practice, is to be in nature. And perhaps to find a particular spot in nature that you can revisit frequently and observe its impermanence, to observe its changes. This is a particularly good time of year to do that as the seasons are changing. To notice the beauty of the bloom and the beauty of the decay. To notice the changes in the temperature. We're fortunate to live in a place where we experience sometimes dramatic shifts in the weather, especially again this time of year, as we observe the waning weeks of summer and usher in the new season of fall, to notice the changes around us. And I'd love to share a poem to conclude. And it comes from Mary Oliver. And it's called The Summer Day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who is eating sugar out of my hand. Who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down. Who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps, her wings open, and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Thank you.
Thank you.
And now I would invite us to have a conversation, perhaps about impermanence, perhaps about any of the 4 foundations of mindfulness and practices that have been helpful to you in thinking about them, any questions that we have for one another, or anything at all that moves you in this moment. Yes.
Okay. I'd like to hear suggestions about what to do when, in our modern times, mindfulness has sort of become a cliche, and some people just dismiss it, with the rolled eyes, that kind of thing. It has a vogue, it's sort of like gender studies or neurodivergence or even the COVID vaccine. Everybody's talking about it for a while, but how many people are actually practicing it? And the interesting thing is that John Kabat-Zinn went to my alma mater, Bryn Mawr in Haverford.
Oh, yes, very nice.
But how can we keep mindfulness from becoming too mass-produced like Christmas?
Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
I think the proof is in the pudding. In the taste of mindfulness, we find its value, and not in the buzz about it, not in the theories about it, not in the opinions about it, but in the experience of it itself. So, I don't really. I think we need to go into it and not approach it as a fashion or a desirable thing to do or a quality to have, but just be present in it, finding our way through it.
Well, I agree with you, but for example, I know someone at my former church who's actually a professor of mindfulness at Westchester University in Pennsylvania. And how can you be a professor of mindfulness?
Well, we have our experience not thanks to professors.
Right, exactly.
Right.
But I just think that's part of being mass-produced. He's getting a salary, he has a job.
That's good for him. But what's good for you?
Well, I wouldn't want to be academic about it, let's put it that way.
Yeah. So we just practice.
Yeah, I guess so. Can't do anything about what other people do.
Yes, Nancy.
The words that come to my mind is, who cares about anybody else? It's a personal journey. It's your personal path. It doesn't matter what anybody else says or thinks or wears t-shirts, I meditate, or something. Who cares about them? You just do what you do.
Sure.
Yeah. And incidentally, as a byproduct, maybe some people who are caught up in it for superficial reasons may end up finding meaning in going on a personal path of their own. I mean, it's possible. You just can't affect other people. You just do what you do in life.
I guess it's just hard to keep things from becoming trendy. You know how yoga became trendy all of a sudden?
But I don't care
Yeah.
about those people. If I don't do yoga, I have done yoga. But if I did yoga, it wouldn't matter to me a hoot what everybody else thought about it or trended about it or something.
Yeah, that's the Socratic know thyself.
I can't affect that. It doesn't take away from the value of the yoga. So, that's my opinion.
Thank you. Yes.
Your thoughts, John. So, have a simple question. How long have you practiced mindfulness? And what is your beginning purpose to practice this mindfulness? And so far, how do you feel the change of your insight after your practice over the time?
Yes, thank you. Well, I discovered Mahasati meditation 3 years ago, and before that I did have a Vipassana practice as well, maybe 5 years prior to that, but I first discovered mindfulness in college, so more years ago than I prefer to share. Maybe about 35 years ago.
50 years since I went to college.
And to answer your question, it has been a wonderful and enlivening experience for me, especially with respect to the space that I spoke to before. And this idea of non-judgment was a real game changer for me, if you will. I remember feeling tremendous relief when a meditation teacher first said to me, you don't have to have an opinion about everything. And it occurred to me, I don't? What a novel concept, which is not to say that we shouldn't have opinions, but it's not necessary to have an opinion about everything. And when you rest with that, there's actually more space, more openness, more opportunity to formulate better opinions, whatever that amounts to, but certainly to live more skillfully, more mindfully.
So it's changed the way you see the world or the way you interact with people?
Yes, unquestionably, yes.
So what do mindfulness practitioners do in the face of obvious injustices? Because if you just say no judgment, then you don't know right from wrong.
Right.
I mean, you have to speak out about some things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it is perhaps a fine line, but, when it comes to injustice, I think the admonition is to act and to do something about it in the present moment. But simply to complain about it is not useful.
No.
Yes.
I just want to say something. It's interesting. You should begin with John Kabat-Zinn, because not too long ago I picked up his little book from the 1970s. I guess it was published. Wherever you go, there you are.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the book. Maybe here you are.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever. And it's still an outstanding, simple little book, and so much value in it. I really. It was on the back of my bookshelf somewhere from years ago, and it's still very worth reading, that little book. And it's in little short chapters, so right before you go to sleep, you can have some wonderful thought in your mind by
Yes, thank
reading
you.
that little book.
He's got a new edition with some
Really?
updated information.
new edition?
It might be a 50th anniversary edition.
Oh,
It's been about 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
well, I mean, in the new edition, has he added to it or changed it?
Yes,
or
very
is it
much so.
being reissued?
No, with contemporary considerations.
Oh.
So I think even post pandemic.
John, something that you said really struck me about this 4 foundations of mindfulness is that we have to build up a vocabulary, you said. And I think it's the laying out. There's all these, we have awareness, but awareness is a matter of sometimes focusing on an aspect, and if we have a vocabulary, we can maybe see where we are lost or tangled in one area. We're so obsessed about the bodily form, or we're so caught in chasing phenomena. Mm-hmm. And to know that is to have a freedom from it. Mm-hmm. And to have a word for it is maybe really good to let go of the grip. Mm-hmm. And that's a good thing about those words, because often words are replacing the experience, but that is really to say, okay, well, here you are. And I want to also thank you very much for your talk, which was so thoughtful and comes through experiencing it inside rather than in the land of theory. So I admit you as a good professor
Thank you.
of truth.
You can be a professor of mindfulness after all.
Yes, okay, that's a
Without grades and without papers to write it.
that perhaps brings us around full circle.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And again, thank you all.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
For coming.
Thank you.